I'd like to welcome you to this vital conversation, Be Employed, and thank you for coming to participate tonight. My name is Madeline Lennon. I chaired the committee that produced the Vital Signs report. And so it's very exciting for me to see what's come out of that, many things, but especially this new effort at vital conversations in the community. So it's important that we're here tonight, and I thank you again. I also thank Goodwill for hosting us this evening. We've had other events here in the past, and it's always felt very good to be here. I also want to thank Deloitte, our sponsor, and to welcome Stuart Cottrell, tax partner at Deloitte, to bring some welcome remarks. Stuart?
Thank you very much. On behalf of Deloitte and all my staff and colleagues, I just want to say thank you to everyone here. This is a fantastic event for everyone to be able to discuss and tackle the issues that we face in a community. These are really important conversations because they're what leads to the change that makes a difference for everyone in London. And so thank you all for being here because you're really what makes the change happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. We'd like now to acknowledge the history of the Indigenous territory on which we meet today. It seems all the more fitting because Indigenous peoples have stewarded these lands and worked to build their communities for thousands of years. The Arawandran peoples once settled this region alongside the Algonquin and Haudenosaunee and used this land as their traditional hunting grounds. The three current and long-standing Indigenous groups of this geographic region are the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Lenape. The three First Nations communities closest in proximity to us in this territory are the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. We respectfully give this acknowledgement as allies in the work to improve the lives of all peoples in this region. I'd now like to welcome Michael Curry from the London Poverty Research Center at King's University College to talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Mike?
Thank you. Good evening, and so nice to see all these wonderful faces here, people to discuss Be Employed and decent work and how it intersects with a variety of social and economic challenges we're facing. So I've been asked just to share a few words about the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you're not aware, these conversations that London Community Foundation are hosting are kind of framed also by the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you see the pictures on your table there, each of those images represent one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, they were produced among over 180 countries in the United Nations and ratified in 2015 as a universal framework and plan to create a better and more sustainable future. So really, it was international groups thinking about how can we get to a more sustainable future. And this is a big deal because as we know, as we work to address local challenges and problems in London, we start to see that there's overlap and overflow from across the world, even as we try to work locally, right? And so the Sustainable Development Goals put forward 17 goals, and some of these are on your tables right there. And under each of these goals, they set targets, so what exactly do we want to achieve? And then they lay out indicators, how do we want to measure that we're achieving these goals? So for example, some of the goals that we want to hit: no poverty, reduce inequalities, we want responsible consumption and production, we want climate action and decent work. These are the broad goals that are being put together in that international context. Now what I find exciting about these goals is that they change the conversation a little bit. Rather than just talking about our environmental problems and then talking about our social problems, and then talking about our economic problems, that they literally put together an integrated framework and a discourse that brings these all together and overlaps them, right? This seems to be the way of the future. In many local community conversations that we sit in, we start to recognize, how do we affect the cleanliness of our river if we don't affect how our production occurs? How do we create decent jobs if we don't look at future possibilities for economic development, that kind of thing, right? And so at the London Poverty Research Centre, and this is occurring in conversation with the London Community Foundation and United Way London, and also with the City of London through the London for All group, what we're doing is we're working to localize the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's taking the goals, taking the targets and the indicators, and saying, well, what do these mean for London specifically? How can we start to create a baseline measurements across these 17 goals? And how can we participate and be part of the conversation in moving forward this kind of integrated approach and this integrated discourse? And so, as we're doing that work, what we found is that, some of the goals and the targets, so I'll give you a quick little few numbers. So there's 17 goals, there's 169 targets that have been set out, and there's 244 indicators that are set out. And some feedback that we've got from other folks is they say, well, I thought United Nations and these Sustainable Development Goals, these are only for developed countries, and it's all about sort of the international relations, right? But what we're coming to terms with, and it's integrated from municipal to provincial and national levels, is that we need to develop a coordinated approach where cities take responsibility for what we can do and that we coordinate across those levels. So what we found is that about 57%, if you really want to get the percent, 57% of the 244 indicators, that those can be really localized and measured in the London context. And so what we're hoping to do with that is creating baseline measurements, and then this can become a tool for both advocating areas that we need to do better in, and also just encouraging certain types of collective projects. Now, I'll leave you just with a couple words why I think that the Sustainable Development Goals is an absolutely wonderful framework for us to be building up our community conversations within. First, it links local agendas with national and international agendas. And I'll tell you something, as I've worked in localized communities and local community development, sometimes it can feel a little bit hollow because you start to realize, yeah, we might be able to do this here in my neighborhood, but what about, all the neighborhoods across Canada or the other neighborhoods in Mozambique, right? And you start to come to terms with, it would be nice to have a confederated or a federated front to know that we're not just doing it here, but it's happening elsewhere. The second thing that I really think is important about this conversation is the overlap of economic, social, and environmental justice questions. And all of this comes together, and this is a terminology I want to start promoting or start having us use in our language, that this is all part of what they're calling Agenda 2030. So the United Nations sort of coins this. It comes down through our federal governments as Agenda 2030, and this Agenda 2030 is really just code and a sort of solidarity language to say we're working towards these progress in these areas, and we're trying to do it locally and nationally. One thing that I want to say about that, about Agenda 2030. So Agenda 2030 means reaching the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. That's really what the whole push of that is. And really, when it comes to today's conversation around being employed and decent work, I just want to, this is a fun little other piece to add, is that we get these very interesting trends going on in terms of economic development and job creation. And when we can start thinking about that in terms of how does that intersect with things like poverty reduction and clean energy and climate change, right? We start to get very interesting frameworks coming forward. And one place that we start to see that framework coming is in what's being called the Green New Deal. And these are specifically ways of ensuring that there's equitable economic gains across society while also building up our green energy sectors and our green sectors, while also ensuring that those who have been on the margins and are on the margins are increasingly included in our economy. And so I just want to draw that parallel, Green New Deal, SDGs, wonderful work, and I'm so glad that the London Community Foundation has really done a great job in starting to bring this conversation to London. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I think it's really helpful to have this introduction because the community foundations are taking the lead on promoting the SDGs in Canada, and the vital conversations are based on these SDGs. So when we get to the roundtable part tonight, you'll see how we're going to work through some of the Sustainable Development Goals. Before we get to the roundtable, we're going to have a series of short speakers, not short, but they're not short, they're all taller than I am, so presentations that will give us significant background on the issues around being employed. And the first speaker tonight is Don Kerr from King's University College. So let's welcome Don.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As a word of introduction, I'm actually a demographer by training. In case you don't know, perhaps I'll start by giving you a dictionary definition of demography. Demography is really the scientific study of population, right? So we like to look at the bigger picture, right? Demographers work with social statistics, which might compare countries or different provinces within Canada or different cities. So I guess my role here is to provide a bit of context in terms of, from my perspective, what our local labor market is looking at like right now relative to other cities in Canada. Just briefly, let me mention, in terms of demography, one thing I'd like to emphasize that, well, let's start with population growth. Our city's growing at a relatively robust pace as of late, last couple of years, more so than previous years. But there's nothing really unusual about London, Ontario. For the last 20 years or so, our population has been growing at roughly the national rate, like maybe slightly slower than other parts of metropolitan Canada, but it's been growing, nothing unusual there. Something which is particularly relevant when we speak of labor market, labor force, is population aging, of course, and our population is rapidly aging, as I can tell from my own photograph, right? But yeah, the baby boomers are quickly approaching retirement, or many of them are in retirement now. But again, on this, if we think of London, Ontario, we're not unusual, right? If you look at the average age, if you look at the proportion over the age of 65, quite comparable to the national average. More or less the same proportion that are children. We have a slight surplus of young adults, but nothing unusual, quite comparable to other parts of metropolitan Canada, right? So when we're thinking of our low labor force participation rate, it really isn't the age structure that's driving it. Now, in terms of local labor market, a lot of people get the impression that things are going along quite well as of late, I think. I think there might be a bit of misinformation out there, but that's my opinion. Like the unemployment rate's been pretty low, right? It's been between 5 and 6% for some time now. It actually fell below 5% for a while there. It was at 4.7%, I think it was 2018 it was there. Now it's hovering at about 6%. So you get the impression that things are moving along quite nicely. Some people even speak of a labor shortage in the area. Lots of jobs, no workers in southwestern Ontario. I'm not so sure. If you look at the national picture, I mean, that's quite encouraging. Most people would say that 2018, 2019 were pretty good years in Canada. A lot of job creation in Ontario and in central Canada, so times are good, right? But what's happening locally? All right, this time series I find is fascinating, okay? What I have here is total number of persons employed in our city from 2006 right through to the present. This is the most up-to-date data that we have available. And if you look at it, back in January 2006, I use that time point because that's when the Conservatives were first elected, in fact, in Canada. Stephen Harper was elected back then. We had 246,000 people working in London, and look at where we're at right now, right? That's the most recent up-to-date data. We're at 244,000 people working, right? Which is remarkable if you think about it. And the record of the Liberals, at least locally, doesn't look any better than that, right? It's, again, there are fewer people working in London today than was true when Justin Trudeau got elected back in the fall of 2015, right? So, I mean, not much job creation or job growth. The number of people employed has not increased. And the astounding thing about this, in my mind, what's astounding, is that over the same period, nationally, we've seen 20% growth in terms of total number of people employed over this period, right? And even London, in London, we've seen our population grow by about 13, 14% over this period, right? So there's the big mystery, right? Like, how can we have such a low unemployment rate in a context of population growth and no real job growth or job creation? That's the mystery, right? I think this explains, to a certain extent, not explains, but at least documents what's happening. What I have here is a time series, same time period, but looking at the total number of people that are unemployed in our city using Stats Canada's definition, and the total number of people who are not in the labor force, again using Stats Canada's definition. And yeah, our unemployment rate's really low because the number of people unemployed in our city has remained quite low, right? It's at near historic low, right, for this age group. I'm focusing here on persons aged 25 to 54. In a sense, I'm sort of controlling for age structure. I'm looking at people that you'd expect to be working, right? Because by age 25, most people have completed their education, right? And if they haven't completed their education, they're probably working part-time, right? The overwhelming majority are, in fact, working part-time, right? So you'd expect these people to be working, and we've seen a growth in the number of people who've just dropped out of the labor force. Again, how does Stats Canada define these things, right? You know that. Stats Canada defines a person as being unemployed. If they're jobless, they're merely asked, are you looking for a job? And if someone's looking for a job, they are classified as being unemployed. If they say that they're not looking for a job for whatever reason, right, they're classified as outside of the labor force, right? And that's where we've seen this growth. People who are jobless but not looking for a job. In a sense, they're the hidden jobless, right? I mean, you don't see that in the unemployment numbers. All right, so I don't have much time. I just want to show you one more slide. And it's dramatic, really, in my mind. This is from the most recent release of the Labor Force Survey, and we continue to be at the bottom of the pile on this. That's London at the bottom in the red, okay? And what I have here is a very simple, straightforward indicator, and I sort of personally prefer it to the unemployment rate, okay? And here I'm just, again, looking at people of prime working age, 25 to 54, and I just document the percentage that report having a job, right? The percentage employed. And on that, we're dead last, We're at 78%. This is from Stats Canada's Labor Force Survey. Look at Quebec City. It's remarkable. Quebec City has over 91% employed. And that's true of women and men in Quebec City, right? Over 90% of men and women in Quebec City of that age group are actually working. And we're actually at the bottom of the pack here on this statistic. So it is quite surprising. We don't really have good information on why these people are not working, right? The characteristics of those that have dropped out of the labor force, but it has important implications, right? Socioeconomic implications, you could be assured. So on that, I hope I've provided a bit of context. I have to give my colleagues here an opportunity to speak. So on that, thank you very much.
So in a disruptive world, transformation is paramount and adaptation is key. No one is really immune to the shifts and the need to adapt. Today, together, we're having a vital conversation about being employed so we can enrich the quality of life for all, inspire innovative solutions, and build a strong foundation where anything we dream could be possible. My name is Christina Fox, and I'm the CEO of TechAlliance, a regional innovation center located here in London that helps entrepreneurs dream, grow, and start technology companies. So I'm just on the other side of my first 30 days as the new CEO, and I dream of a prosperous economy where everyone has the opportunity to lead, to be employed, and to thrive, no matter what the future of work looks like, where the dreamers and doers get to determine how they will create work or be employed. So to that end, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about the future of work. So in the industries of tomorrow, the future of work does look very different. Every company could be a tech company, because I share this because tech is the new economy. Everyone sitting here knows that technology is pervasive and ubiquitous, and tech for good is capable of changing the very things we need to evolve. So because we know this, we need to work now to ensure that we're involving everyone in the process and equipping each person with unique and varied qualities, education and experience to succeed as innovators in our community. Throughout history, new technologies have disrupted the workforce by automating tasks traditionally performed by humans. And now at the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution, the convergence of many technologies with digitization and artificial intelligence is expected to accelerate automation. The truth is, this story has a hopeful ending and calls for mobilization to promote the development of skills that complement emerging technologies exists. Workers, employers, employment agencies, governments, and institutions of education must all be involved. So for the purpose of getting us all on the same page, let me take you through a short history lesson about technological change and industrial revolutions. I was worried you might talk a little bit about this, Don, so I think I'm still good. Technology has been a hallmark of economic progress throughout human history. So the invention of the steam engine was a key technological innovation of the first industrial revolution. Second industrial revolution introduced electric power in factories and the implementation of production lines, enabling mass production of goods for a wider range of people. The 1960s brought the third industrial revolution, marked by the start of digitization and the broader application of computers in the workplace. So the current phase of technological change, often referred to as Industry 4.0, is characterized by machine-to-machine communication, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things. So for the future-focused organizations to succeed in the fourth industrial revolution, a bold approach is needed, where diversity, agility, transparency, disruption, and experience are not embraced, but encouraged. To that end, the way we work really is changing forever. Workforces and workplaces and the work we do and the organizations we do it for are undergoing unprecedented revolution, and it can be very exciting. So let me describe a few key indicators that the future of work is actually upon us. First, let's review the concept of fluid gigs, decentralized workforces, and work motivators. Within an organization, positions will be more fluid, and a strict organizational chart might be tossed in favor of more project-based work. And while this might feel like it's flying in the face of the UN's SDG goal number 8 of decent work and economic growth, the gig economy is especially appealing to Gen Z. Those are the employees who desire multiple roles over the course of their career. So while employees also don't necessarily need to be in the same location to have creative collisions and collaboration in the workplace, but more and more people do want to work for or create a company that has a mission and a purpose they believe in. To attract the next generation of talent, we need to continue to evolve workplaces where cultures are innovative, creative, fun, and inspire. I mean, who are we kidding? It's not just about the next generation attracting the talent. I want the same, don't you? So the second indicator of the future of work already upon us is that technology will augment human jobs. So artificial intelligence algorithms and intelligent machines will be co-workers to humans. It seems so far-fetched, but while there has been so much focus on how robotics will disrupt workforces, relatively little attention has actually been given to how emerging technologies can make workers' jobs easier and more efficient. This is essentially using smart technologies to enhance human performance. Augmentation, not automation, opens the door to a world of work where employees and AI-based technologies function together in a kind of cyber symbiosis. This new direction ushers in the sudden demand for a different set of human skills, leading us to the final indicator, that the future of work is upon us. It truly is lifelong learning. It's not even a new concept. So technology will continue to evolve the role that humans play in the workforce, so most everyone will be required to adapt new skills throughout their working lives. When learning and information is readily available, and AI and augmentation become colleagues or tools, if you will, it kind of levels the playing field. It's a bit of a provocative idea, but suddenly the better employee might not be the one with the most experience anymore. Instead, it might be the employee who is best able to exploit and use the tools that deliver information and derive the most astute insights from them. It's these employees that may have the competitive edge, people who evolve with the tools that are available. Back to lifelong learning. So how do we prepare? Think of the future of work as not as a famine, but more as a feast, where humans get the opportunity to do work that demands more from their creativity, imagination, social and emotional intelligence, and passion. The true opportunity for decent work could be realized with the development of 3 key human qualities. Number 1, real-world skills, like complex problem solving, emotional intelligence, cognitive flexibility, resourcefulness and communication, networking, design thinking, presenting, and collaborating. Number 2, the knowledge of emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, and mixed reality. And number 3, a bit of a boss mentality, meaning confidence, service orientation, tenacity, grit, self-agency, and thinking 10x all day, every day. With the adoption and activation of these few human key qualities, this is really where the opportunity lies. And when you think about the changes on the horizon, we can understand why people sort of in the know are more excited about the future of work because of the potential for every employee. Dream of the possibilities in this globally connected and computational world where superstructure organizations create collaboration, cross-cultural competencies with transdisciplinary, native, and adaptive thinking. Imagine that. Imagine the future of work with sustainable and inclusive prosperity, where new ways of working will mean flexibility and empowerment to drive economic growth. Like any worthwhile journey, one rarely goes the distance alone. So let's continue to have this vital conversation to ensure prosperity for all of us. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm getting over a cold, so if I start to cough and hack, please forgive me. We've already worked it out. Someone's going to come and jump up here. So first of all, I'd like to thank the London Community Foundation for hosting these vital conversations. I think it's so important that our community has spaces like this to come together and have these conversations. My name's Andrea Topham, and I'm the Executive Director of ATN Access. And for folks in the room who aren't aware of what we do, at ATN, we support folks with disabilities and other barriers to find employment. So at ATN, to be employed really means to belong, and we strive to ensure that everyone should have this opportunity every day. We come at this work from 2 ways. We work both with individuals and we work with employers and community members. So this evening, I think I'm going to focus on what we do with employers in the community rather than individual success stories of our clients. More and more, even though we have some amazing stories of personal triumph, I start to realize that when we tell these stories, we run the risk of exceptionalizing people and their experiences. And maybe this leaves the impression that perhaps someone with disabilities getting a job is unique, and it shouldn't be. Because inclusion needs to be normalized. Last year, we piloted a program called Ready, Set, Shine. And the goal of the program was to promote labor market inclusion for 10 folks with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. And the response from our community was overwhelming. We ended up having to stretch our capacity to serve 67 people who all were eager for the opportunity to be employed and belong. And when we take that And we look at it in context of a study that was done last year by the Public Health Agency of Canada, which found that 1 in 66 children between the ages of 5 and 17 were diagnosed with ASD. I'm going to say that again because it's a really big number. 1 in 66 kids between 5 and 17 have been diagnosed with ASD. When we think about that, employers have to start to include people with disabilities in their future planning. This is a huge demographic of people who can and want to contribute to our labor market, and we need to find ways to reach out to these folks and include them. And to do this, we need to flip our thinking, and we need to change our attitudes. We need to stop thinking that employing someone with disability is helping them, and we need to start to recognize the valuable contributions that everyone can make in our labor force. Although it's really nice to think we're being inclusive if we have the right policies and include language in our job postings about accommodation, unless we start to focus on the strengths that someone brings to the table, as opposed to how they're different, we won't actually be building inclusive workplaces. So don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about accessibility. We really need to continue to focus on creating accessible spaces throughout our entire community. And I'm going to borrow language from someone who speaks far more eloquently on this topic than I do. No amount of positive attitude can turn a set of stairs into a ramp or turn books on a bookshelf into Braille. But I'm talking about something that's a little bit different than accessibility. I'm talking about, instead of trying to find individuals that have the right fit in your corporate cultures, creating corporate cultures that support all individuals. And here's the difference. So traditional approaches to accommodation kind of say, you know what, I think you can do the job, but you're a little different from me. What can we add in so that you can do the job the same way that I do it? And I'm challenging everyone here to start from a different place. Start with, I see your strengths, and that you have many skills and abilities. Let's figure out together what supports you need to realize your full potential. It's subtle, but it's important. So where do we start? I think we start by breaking what I like to call some of the stupid rules that we all seem to follow when we hire people. We've been using these same rules and the same processes forever, despite the fact the world's a vastly different place. You know, we probably use them because it's a system we know, or maybe because we think it limits some of the risk involved in hiring someone. But what if these processes actually hinder us from finding the right candidate? Let's look at the traditional interview process, which basically makes everyone involved feel uncomfortable, whether you're the person being interviewed or you're the person doing the interviewing. So what we found with Ready, Set, Shine is we tried something different. We reached out to employers and we said, instead of interviewing, what if you did a tour? And we had a client and one of our staff members show up at the employer's place of business, and they did a tour. And the employer's excited because everybody likes to talk about what they do. And that kind of framed the whole experience. That excitement became contagious. So as they're walking through and looking at what they do there, the employer is able to ask the potential job candidate questions in a really relaxed environment. Then perhaps they go to where this person might be working, and the employer gets to ask them, hey, you know, this is where you might be working. Would you like to give it a shot? Bam, we've created an opportunity for someone to show their strengths without all of the formality in the process. So now let's talk about job postings. Another thing we learned through the program is that job postings that are focused on functions, as opposed to a long list of required qualifications, actually remove barriers. So many, I mean certainly not all, folks with ASD tend to see things really literally. So let's look at an example of hiring a programmer. Do you really need someone with 5 years programming experience? Or do you need a programmer with crazy awesome programming skills? Someone with ASD, who may be a rock star programmer with 4 years and 10 months experience, may choose not to apply because they read that you need 5 years. Another common qualification that we all list on all of our job postings is strong communication skills. Well, if you think of someone on the autism spectrum, they've been told since they were a kid that they have problems with communication. I'm not saying that all jobs, or that there aren't some jobs that require folks with strong communication skills. I'm saying to really stop and think what it is that you need for the functions of that job. So I did a bit of research on Indeed in preparation for this, and I found 2 examples that I kind of like to leave you with. The first was a local company, and I think they're on the right path. They have a job listing, there's tons of qualifications, but they have a little disclaimer at the bottom that says, look, I get that this is really long, we get this is long. If you have some of it, please come ahead and apply. And I think this is great, but I think like we tell folks with their resumes, put the important stuff up top. So someone with disabilities or even someone without disabilities might be reading that, get to the third one, say, I don't have this, and stop reading. If you had that disclaimer up top, you might encourage a whole host of folks to apply. And the last example was actually, I think, pretty apropos considering someone who has taken the world stage recently. And it was a post for an environmental activist position. So these were the must-haves. College degree in a related field, minimum 3 years experience training and organizing others, and prior experience working for or on the board of directors of an environmental agency. And as I was reading this, I'm thinking, does this hiring manager really need someone with a degree and prior board experience, or do they need someone who can start a movement? Someone perhaps like a 16-year-old girl who wears braids from Sweden, who describes her ASD as her superpower, and she's used that superpower to wake up the world. And adults and children everywhere are coming together to act against climate change. So for folks who aren't familiar with who I'm talking about, I urge you to go home and Google Greta Thunberg and watch her videos. And for folks who have watched them, I encourage you to watch them again because she's amazing. And while you're watching them, I'd like you to keep in mind how you can help our community get to a place where people are exceptional, but stories of meaningful work and belonging are not. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here because I get to share my story with all of you. So as compared to everybody else, I see myself as a smaller player, but definitely making a big impact. My name is Habib. I'm an interior designer by profession, and I see some familiar faces, so that makes me feel really happy. Hi, Jack. So I am now the founder and CEO of Skilled Accents. Skilled Accents is a social enterprise that actually is trying to make a big difference in the lives of refugee immigrants in London, Ontario. So what we do is we create decorative pillows out of recycled fabrics. We collect those fabrics from local furniture and drapery stores, and we turn them into beautiful products. You see some of the pillows showcased in the picture right there. And the women that we work with are refugees from Syria and Iraq, and they don't necessarily have a lot of language and educational background that we may need in Canada for the mainstream jobs. But for my social enterprise, they fit perfectly because they love to sew and they're really talented. So, tell you a little bit about myself. I was basically, I moved to Canada by accident. So basically what happened was I was in Pakistan. I was raised in Pakistan, I studied in Pakistan, and I studied interior design there. And I went to Australia following my husband, and I completed my MBA there, thinking that I will start my interior design business in Australia. And it was right after when 9/11 happened. So for me, being from Pakistan and going to a country where they were very protective about their country, it was a little bit hard to adjust there. So I still, kind of kept going, and I worked hard, and I got my degree, and decided to go to a country that was a little bit more multicultural. And I had a lot of family in the US, so I looked, I did some research, and Canada seemed to be a country that would suit me perfectly because I had a lot of cousins and they loved the culture here. So we moved to Canada in 2006. And of course, at that time, the first priority for me was to make sure that I am able to have some income for my family. So I found the entry-level job, and I started working and started getting a paycheck, got comfortable there, and got laid off after about 3 years. And at that point, it made me really realize that, okay, what did I actually dream of before I came to Canada? What was my dream? It was becoming an interior designer and following my passion, which is making spaces beautiful. So I started looking around, and it was really hard as a person who has a degree from elsewhere in Canada to find something or someone that will hire me. So I decided to create my own job. And for me, when I talk about being employed right now, for me, when I think back and I really look at being employed, it really means for me that having a job that aligns with my purpose and making a positive impact in the world that we live in. So for me, it was really important that some of the values that I had as a person would really align with whatever I'm taking my future into. So I started, slowly kind of forming my company, and I started volunteering with a nonprofit, and there we were building a social enterprise incubator. That really, exposed me to the world of this amazing, form of business where you are looking at a triple bottom line. So we're thinking about the environment, the social impact, and of course the economical impact of the particular business. And so I worked there for a couple of years, and then from there on, I decided to kind of, take it forward and build my own design business. So at that point, I was empowered enough, and I was confident enough, and I had a little bit more experience and links in the community where I was now confident that I can take my business to the next step. So and people started knowing me in the community more, and I was always talking to my client about reusing and repurposing a lot of their decor in the home. So pillows are my passion. So I love the decorative pillows, and I think pillows actually make any space beautiful. So a lot of clients actually asked me about creating these custom pillows. And it really took me back to where I was working with the social enterprise incubator. I had a small enterprise where we were working with a lot of South Asian women, where they were creating crafts, and they were very well received in the community. So I started talking to people about it, and I visited CCLC, which is Cross Cultural Learner Center, and I found a sewing group of these refugee women from Syria and Iraq, and they're very highly skilled in sewing. So I started talking to these women about, how are they doing in Canada, how they like it, and what are some of the challenges they have, and what would they like to do. So they all love sewing, but they had no English skills, and I don't speak Arabic. A lot of people assume that I do, so they started talking to me in Arabic. So I had to ask an interpreter for me to speak with them, and they basically said that if they could find a job that will be something to do with sewing, and something that they can do from home, and somebody who can give them some equipment in their homes, they would be happy to work with that company. It's really hard for a lot of those women to even just have that confidence to go out and talk to somebody about finding a job. So when we talk about people going out and looking for jobs, these are some of the people that are actually not even making that effort, because they know that when they go out and talk to people about finding a job, first of all, they can't even speak English. They have a lot of cultural limitations. They have financial limitations. They have to take care of their kids. They don't have their men with them. Like, they just have their kids, and they have to take care of them, run the house, and then somehow make some money. So just speaking with them was so inspiring for me. So I said, okay, well, what if I offered you something that they may work for both of us? So I'm looking at making these pillows, and what if I gave you a sewing machine in your home and gave you the fabric, all the equipment, all the supplies? Would you like to work for me? So, and they were all very excited. So I had them make some samples, and they were very happy to do that, and they were all very talented, even more than I had actually thought. So that's how Skilled Accents was born. So it was back last year, May 2018, and I have 9 women working with me now. They all work from home. They have the flexibility to come and work with me in my showroom now. I have been awarded a loan by Pillar Nonprofit, so I have a showroom where I can actually sell those pillows from. And again, like, I have every day I have a new furniture store, a new drapery store coming to me and say, would you take our remnants and would you take our scrap fabric and just make it into this beautiful product? So I feel like that, something that other businesses should be a little bit more educated on, that, some of the things that we are doing with our businesses, how can we tweak it a little bit and see how we can involve other people, like the Syrian and Iraqi women. So, that's basically my story, and I think I took a little bit more time than I was supposed to. But I would just like for you guys to come and visit and, meet me in person at my showroom, and I would love for you guys to actually meet those women who are being, impacted so positively with this experience. Like, they come to me every day and say, all the things that we've been through back in their country, which has been extremely traumatic. Like, if you sit down and speak with them about their stories, this particular employment that they've found, that every 2 weeks they get a paycheck, also gives them so much joy. Each pillow that they make is signed by the woman, it's whoever has made it, so herself. So when they look at it and people are buying it, they're really involved in that sales process. They're really involved in that marketing process, where they want to talk to people about how much joy that pillow gave them, not just the income, but also the joy and the pride that goes back to their home, and their daughters look up to them now, and they forget about that trauma now, and they're very thankful to be in Canada, but just to have this employment as well, which will hopefully lead to a lot more in their future. So thank you for listening to me. And I hope to see you guys again at my showroom.
Anin. Bonjour, Anin. My name is, in English, is Robin Henry. My Anishinaabe name translated means the Great Wolf. I used to be called Mayingans. Mayingans means little wolf, and it in our community, a lot of the time we earn our names. They change over time, and you might start out in one place, just like in real life, and end up somewhere completely different. My name was Mayingans, little wolf. I think maybe more appropriately was like very little wolf. I had a lot of growth and a lot of work to do on myself, and for me, what came out of that growth, what came out of that work that I was doing, was my little print shop. And so I'm a screen printer, I'm a graphic designer, I'm an artist, and in recent years I've become a mentor. And I guess I was asked to submit like a quote for the projection behind me, and for me, I thought, I'm here to make a living, not a killing. So I never even thought that I could pay my rent doing art. Like, that was such a unattainable goal. My self-worth was so low. I felt so angry, so frustrated with the world. I didn't think that there was a place for me in it. Even now, when I was reached out to speak about Be Employed, I was like, where do I get off talking about Be Employed? I mean, for me being employed, my whole life I spent being a terrible employee. I spent the first half of my life, just like screwing up. And I feel pretty good about how far the screw-ups have taken me. There's a quote that I really like, and it's being bad at something is the first step to being good at something. And so, what started off as screwing up led me down a lot of winding paths. And if it wasn't for the mentors that taught me, that showed me that, not only does my art have value, but I have value, that I'm actually deserving of making a living, actually paying my rent, doing what I give a shit about. That's and I know that sounds like such a foreign thing, that maybe people don't feel entitled to even be able to make a living in them on their own. But for us, we in the Indigenous community, there's a lot of barriers to overcome. Same with the queer community, and we've and the thing that came out of that for me is Antler River Press, which is my own printing company. And in recent times, we've evolved it into now what we're calling Rezonance printing. Rezonance printing is a youth program based on our print shops. At one point, my business partner, my now business partner, approached me and he said, I see that you're making art, you're making prints in the arts community. Well, I'm an arts printmaker, I'm an Anishinaabe, you're an Anishinaabe. Like, why don't we team up, and instead of competing with each other, instead of, trying to outsell each other and trying to underbid each other on these print jobs for companies, like, why don't we move together? Why don't we start boosting each other up? And maybe we can even get to a point where we can start boosting our communities up. And I guess for me, that's why I chose, I'm here to make a living and not make a killing. I feel like we've grown up being taught, like, capital is the only thing worth caring about, that making money is the only thing that can be really gratifying. But I've been through this process of building a company, through this process of now starting to pass that on to young people in my community. I've learned that, like, making a living is so much more important than making a killing. It's easy to make money. Like, ultimately, like, I want to live. I think that maybe the point of, us all being here is not to be as productive as we can, but maybe to feel deeply and to maybe share a little bit. So we created Rezonance. Rezonance, we have 3 goals really in our program. The first one was pretty easy to attain because I've been doing that since I was like 16, which is make art every day. When we make art, it's our way of telling our own stories, a way of creating something. You start with nothing, maybe a blank shirt, maybe a blank piece of paper. At the end of the day, you get to say, I made something that's of value, and maybe we have to, like, decide that what we're doing is of worth. Because there's a lot of people out there saying, what you're doing isn't of worth. But working in the arts, that's a valid career, and I spend a lot of time talking to kids, telling them, hey, like, the first thing people say to you when you say, oh, I'm really interested in art, they say, that's cool, how are you gonna pay your rent? And I guess I'm here as a really undereducated person, as a terrible employee, to say that it's a very viable way to make a living. So that's the first goal that we have as our company, and that, just by pulling prints, just by coming up with illustrations for our clients, goal 1, check, easy peasy. The second goal is to connect art with our culture. So I mentioned before that I was a pretty angry, derelict young kid. I went from sleeping under bridges in Halifax to now, for the last 5 years, I've paid my rent exclusively through making art and making prints. And it's something that I have to remind myself, that's, I gotta be humble about that. I've come a long way. And the way that I've kind of like grounded myself, I went from like a very angry person who lashed out a lot, put a lot of the people around me in my life through a lot. The way that I connected to, like, the way that I became grounded was through ceremony, through connecting with my culture, and through talking with it, and talking to the people in that community, through talking with elders, through talking with peers, and finding, like, not these big Elon Musk role models, because it's not realistic, but you know what? There's, like, an old man who lives down the street from me who's been through a lot of the same things that I've been through. There's an old woman who can, like, give me guidance, give me advice about maybe a better way to act. There's lots of people in the community to give me advice about how to run a business. So, connecting with our culture, for me, on a personal level, has been quintessential to, like, my growth as a person, but also my growth as a entrepreneur. And we try to, like, pass that on to the youth in our community. Say, you can tell your story with your art, you can tell your story with your business, you can tell your story in 100 different ways. But the intersections where we sit at, for me being a two-spirited person, that's the story that I get to tell. That's the culture and community that I get to access. Maybe one of my interns is from Treaty 6, another one is from Chippewa of the Thames, and each of those, they have intersections of their own worth telling and stories worth telling. So I really believe that like accessing our culture, sharing that, that's the best way that we get to talk with the youth, but also that we get to like push them forward to grow, and eventually they're going to be the leaders in this community, and we need to really take that really seriously. The third goal is to create economic sovereignty in our community, and that one's a really hard goal to achieve. It's a really abstract one to talk about because, you know, I had a hard time just figuring out how to make my own company. How do I teach like a generation, a group of kids, how to make their business dreams come true, how to make, like, you know, feel that their work is worth a lot. And for us, one of the ways is that, you know, we are, as Rezonance, we are a youth program. We take on mentees. We teach them about screen printing. We teach them about art. We teach them about business. But despite being a, like, what might sound like a charity, we are explicitly not a not-for-profit. We are here to create economic sovereignty in our community. We charge for our services because our labor is worth something, and our conversations and our perspective is worth something. So, you know, acknowledging that and saying, you know, like, we deserve to be paid for that. So that's a big step for us. Yeah, and that's a much longer goal, but I'm pleased to say that, you know, in our community, we've, like, just with a small group of interns that we've had thus far, you know, 2 of them have gone on to college now. 2 of them have gone on to create their own businesses. Some of them are selling on Etsy. Some of them are selling at local markets. They are at 16, 17, way further ahead, have much clearer vision for where they want to be than I was 3 years ago, maybe at like 28. So I feel, you know, that one's a slow grind, but I feel like maybe we're putting in the work to get there. We are funded through the Ontario Arts Council as well as the London Arts Council, so we do get public funding to do what we do. But a lot of what we're doing is also through just when people hire us, we get a print job. We use that print job as a teaching tool to teach these interns, to teach these youth about, like, not only design work, but like how to print it, how to talk with clients. It's a little bit, it feels like a lot to talk about in like just a couple minutes. But I just feel like very blessed to be included in this conversation despite having been a terrible employee for most of my life. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for having me. Miigwech.